house was shaking very bad from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. The watch bell was constantly ringing, and it was almost impossible for us to stand on our feet. There was a barrel of water standing in the cellar, which was half emptied by the shaking of the house. The piles beneath us are now one solid mass of ice nearly as big as a 3-barrel cask. As for the ladder, that cannot be found. It was the most awful situation that ever I was placed in before in my life. Assistant Keeper Samuel Gardner, Minots Ledge Lighthouse. Before we get too deep into things, I want to take a quick second to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. For better or worse, the days of lighthouses in isolation are long behind us. While we used to be able to control what we share about ourselves and who we share it with, these days it feels impossible to keep your information safe. Anyone can use that to bombard you with unwanted calls, texts, and emails, or even steal your identity. That's where Incogni comes in. There are hundreds of data brokers that aggregate your personal information, potentially including your name, login credentials, location history, online activity, even things like your date of birth, social security number, and other sensitive details. Once they get that information, they sell it to the highest bidder. With one simple sign-up, Incogni will contact data brokers on your behalf and request that they remove your personal information. They handle the whole removal process for you. And with Incogni's custom removal feature, if you find a site with your information, just copy the link and send it to Incogni. They're the experts at removing data that shouldn't be available. And it's not just a one-time thing. They will continue to monitor these data brokers to make sure that your data stays off the market and remove it whenever it pops up. This helps cut down on all that annoying spam and adds some protection in an unpredictable world. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code OLDBOATS at the link below to get 60% off an annual plan. Incogni also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. Now back to the Minots Ledge Lighthouse. In 1842, 35-year-old Isaiah W.P. Lewis was appointed by the United States Congress to submit a report on the condition of lighthouses in New England. For 8 months, he toured the region, inspecting 70 lighthouses and surveying the many deadly shoals that claim dozens of vessels every year. His report was submitted on January 31, 1843. The findings were damning. For the past 23 years, Stephen Pleasanton had been superintendent of the lighthouse establishment, a precursor of the United States Lighthouse Board. Formed in 1789 under the Department of the Treasury, the United States Lighthouse Establishment was considered one of the most important functions of the newly formed federal government. Pleasanton became a national hero during the War of 1812 when he saved the Declaration of Independence from the advancing British forces that invaded and burned Washington, D.C. Despite his heroism, Pleasanton knew almost nothing about lighthouses or maritime navigation. He was extremely frugal and only granted funds when absolutely necessary. His friendship with Winslow Lewis led him to invest in Lewis's lighting system, which was based on argon lamps, even when it was abundantly clear that the French Fresnel lens was vastly superior. Isaiah Lewis's report to Congress revealed the extent of Pleasanton's mismanagement of the vital agency. He found that numerous existing lighthouses were in a sorry state of disrepair, and there were numerous sites with heavy shipping traffic that were in desperate need of a new light. These findings forced Pleasanton into action in his final years as head of the agency. One site of particular concern highlighted in the report was Minots Ledge, just off the coast of Cohasset, Massachusetts, near Boston Harbor, one of the most important shipping channels in the country. Between 1832 and 1841 alone, 40 vessels wrecked in the area, killing dozens of sailors. Captain William H. Swift of the U.S. Topographical Bureau eagerly seconded the recommendation and soon took an active role in the project. But establishing a light in the area would be incredibly challenging. Minots Ledge is a reef that extends approximately 2 miles along the coast of Cohasset and Scituate. No one knows exactly where the name came from, but some believe that it was named after George Minot, who owned the R Wharf in Boston in the mid-1700s. A ship named after him was known to have wrecked on the rocks. The first recorded shipwreck in the area was a ship called the Mary on January 22, 1683. But for generations before, the indigenous Quinnahassa people were said to leave offerings to appease the spirits that lived in the rocks. Numerous shipwrecks followed the Mary. On February 12, 1793, a ship called the Gertrude Maria dramatically wrecked on the rocks on a voyage from Copenhagen to Boston. Some of her crew was killed trying to reach the shore. The 21 that survived huddled on the rocks until morning, when they were finally rescued by locals. Over the years, numerous petitions were sent to Congress begging for a new light, but no action was taken until Isaiah Lewis issued his damning report. The lighthouse would have to be placed a mile offshore on a rock ledge that was only exposed for a few hours during low tide. It was a daunting task. Lewis was particularly interested in the Eddystone Lighthouse, built by John Smeaton on the Eddystone Rocks off Cornwall, England in 1759, as well as the Bell Island Lighthouse off the coast of Scotland, built by Robert Stevenson in 1811. These towers were constructed of interlocking granite blocks to create a solid foundation that could stand up to the punishing sea. Lewis and the noted architect Alexander Paris both believed that such a tower would meet the challenges of Minots Ledge. Then, on February 12, 1847, a brig from New Orleans slammed into the rocks. While the ship survived, limping into Boston Harbor with 9 feet of water in its hold, the accident added urgency to the project, and Congress finally approved an initial appropriation of $20,000. An additional $19,500 would be approved later on. While many preferred a granite tower, Captain William H. Swift had another idea. He believed that granite wouldn't be possible because the ledge selected for construction, called Outer Minnow, was too narrow to support the necessary base. Instead, he proposed a structure supported by iron piles. Swift had designed the nation's postal routes in the early 1830s and had become a trusted engineer and planner. In 1843, he designed an unmanned beacon at the entrance to Black Rock Harbor in Connecticut. The modest tower, supported by iron piles, had held up well over the years, lending credibility to the design. Many doubted that that design could hold up to the punishing storms that frequented the area. But Swift was persuasive. He was adamant that his design could work, and, best of all, it would be significantly cheaper to build than a granite tower. The cost savings alone won the argument. The new Minots Ledge Lighthouse would stand on pillars of iron, a largely untested and experimental design. Work on the lighthouse began in the summer of 1847. A schooner carried men and equipment to the site and dropped anchor. A wooden platform was erected that supported a massive drill, and the 4 men required to operate it went to work boring into the rocks. The project was overseen by contractor Benjamin Pomeroy, who the Boston Journal described as a person of the most extraordinary perseverance and inexhaustible ingenuity. James Sullivan Savage, the man who built Boston's Bunker Hill Monument, oversaw the drilling. The work was dangerous and tedious. Twice the drilling equipment was swept off the ledge. In October 1847, not long after work was paused for the season, a ship called the Alabama wrecked on the ledge about 2 miles east of the construction site. The crew managed to escape, but the ship was lost. The need for the light was always abundantly clear. Drilling resumed in spring 1848, and it would take another full season before the site was ready to support the rest of the tower. 9 10-inch diameter pillars were cemented into the 5-foot deep holes drilled into the rock. They were built by cannon maker Cyrus Alger's Ironworks in South Boston. The piles were braced horizontally by 3 sets of iron rods. This supported a 14-foot diameter octagonal keeper's quarters topped by a wrought iron lantern room. These were surrounded by a 3-foot wide catwalk supported by cast iron brackets. The lantern room was a 16-sided polygon, 11 feet wide and 6.5 feet high, with French plate glass windows all coming in at 70 tons. Work on the piles began in mid-August 1848 and finished on September 21st. The keeper's quarters and lantern room were put in place by October 16th. The entire structure was basically completed by October 30th, coming together only in a little over 2 months after drilling was completed. Captain Swift was pleased with the nearly completed tower, but out of an abundance of caution, he recommended that the final installation of the valuable lighting equipment and the first keeper's occupation should wait until the following season. Perhaps after seeing the completed tower, which locals began calling the cage, Swift began to harbor doubts. The winter would put the structure to the test. In his mind, if it survived the brutal weather, it was fit for habitation. While the tower sat unlit, in 1849, just 3 months before it was scheduled to enter service, a 200-ton Irish brig called the St. John wrecked on the ledge during a storm on its way to Boston Harbor. The ship was carrying over 100 Irish immigrants that had fled the Great Hunger. As she broke apart on the rocks, it was impossible to launch any lifeboats in the roiling storm. Only a tiny handful survived the tragedy. 99 passengers and crew lost their lives. If there were any concerns about the tower, the tragedy overshadowed them. The delicate lighting equipment was finally installed in late 1849. On January 1st, 1850, the light was lit for the first time, casting a life-saving beacon over the busy shipping lane and the deadly rocks that sat just below it. The first light at Minots Ledge consisted of 15 lamps amplified by 21-inch reflectors. The lamps were arranged in 2 tiers and emitted a powerful fixed white light. A solid beacon was selected to provide contrast with the nearby Boston light to the north, which emitted a flashing light. While the exact specifications are lost to time, it's believed that the tower stood somewhere between 70 and 78 feet tall. Its first keeper believed it to be a death trap. Isaac Dunham of Bridgewater, Massachusetts was selected from 50 applicants to man the new lighthouse. Previously the keeper at Pemaquid Point Light in Maine, Dunham's experience made him an obvious choice. He was joined by his son Isaac A. Dunham and Russell Higgins of Cape Cod. After living at the lighthouse for less than a week, Dunham was convinced that the tower was unsafe. He wasn't quiet about his concerns. When Captain Swift's assistant, William Dennison, visited the newly lighted station in January 1850, Dunham told him that, quote, "the structure was a humbug and a trap to drown some poor fellows in." His log entries from the time recount his increasing anxiety as storm after storm rattled the metal structure. On April 6, 1850, he wrote the following entry, quote, "At 4 p.m. the gale continues with great fury. It appears to me that if the wind continues from the east, and it now is that we cannot survive the night." But the tower held. With his nerves torn to shreds, Isaac Dunham finally resigned from Minots Ledge Light on October 1st, 1850. His son and the other assistant also resigned. While the station received numerous applications when it opened, word of its terrible creaking and shaking had gotten out. Advertisements were placed in papers, and the yearly salary offered was increased substantially. Finally, John W. Bennett, a former first lieutenant in the British Navy with 25 years of experience at sea, accepted the job. While he was known for his courage and character, it's much more likely that it was the salary that convinced Bennett to take the job. His salary would be $1,000 a year. His assistants would make between $360 and $550 a year. Considering that the average headkeeper at the time made a nice living at $400 to $600 a year, these salaries were extremely persuasive. Along with the new keepers, Minots Ledge also received a new 640-pound fog bell. When Bennett arrived at the light station, he was pleased to find that the structure seemed relatively stable and solid. The horror story seemed to be overblown. But within a few weeks after a late fall storm swept over the station, Bennett and his assistants grew concerned and asked that the lighthouse be inspected. But when they visited on a calm day, the inspectors assured the keepers that the lighthouse was safe. Bennett was unconvinced. He installed a thick rope that extended from the tower to a rock 200 feet away. The idea was to provide an escape from the tower if things went south. He also made a special flag with a red diamond on a red square that he would fly to signal for help in case of an emergency. As 1850 neared its end, the lighthouse seemed more vulnerable than ever. One visitor told the Boston Journal that the tower swayed as much as 2 feet in every direction during a storm. The shaking was strong enough to throw the keepers from their beds, and at times it made it almost impossible to stand. By the winter, Bennett had reached the same conclusion as Dunham. Minots Ledge Lighthouse was a death trap. After one particularly severe storm that left assistant keeper Samuel Gardner ready to leave the station, Bennett wrote to the local lighthouse superintendent, Philip Greeley, "My firm belief is that unless something is done, and that without procrastination to secure the edifice more firmly, it cannot stand, and I fear something awful will happen." A short time later, during another storm, he wrote the following letter. "When I engaged to keep this light, little did I think that my heart, which has never for 25 years in the most boisterous regions failed me, would tremble at anything here. But here are things I perceive, still in the background, to shake a stouter heart than mine. And so precarious is our present situation, that there is a prospect that this may never reach you. These last 48 hours have been the most terrific that I have witnessed for many a year. The raging violence of the sea no man can appreciate unless he is an eyewitness. The rods put into the lower section are bent up in fantastic shapes. Some are torn asunder from their fastenings. The ice is so massive that there is no appearance of a ladder. The sea is now running at least 25 feet above the level, and each one roars like a heavy peal of thunder. The northern part of the foundation is split, and the lighthouse shakes at least 2 feet each way. I feel as seasick as ever I did aboard a ship. Our lantern windows are all iced up outside, although we have a fire continually burning, and it is not without imminent peril that we climb up outside to scrape it off, which I have done several times already. I have a dread of some ship striking against us, although we have kept the bell constantly ringing at night. Our water is a solid mass of ice in the casks, which we have been obliged to cut into pieces with an axe before we can obtain any drink. Our situation is perilous. If anything happens before day dawns on us again, we have no hope of escape. But I shall, if it be in God's will, die in the performance of my duty." John Bennett's concerns were never addressed. Philip Greeley, the man in charge of lighthouses in the area, maintained that Minots Ledge was safe. But he reluctantly sent a request to Congress asking for an appropriation to strengthen the lighthouse's foundation. He also requested additional pay for its keepers. The tower's designer, Captain Swift, wrote a lengthy piece in the Boston Daily Advertiser defending the integrity of his structure and criticizing the fears of its terrified keepers. By April 1851, the station was manned by head keeper John W. Bennett and 2 young assistants, 20-year-old Joseph Wilson from England and 25-year-old Joseph Antoine from Portugal. On a recent visit to Boston, Wilson described a brutal March storm to a local newspaper that destroyed the station's boat and left the men inside stranded for days. He said that he was ready to leave the light, but he would remain as long as Mr. Bennett does. He was sure that no one would take their place when they left. Despite his lack of confidence in the tower, he said that if the worst happened, he would remain at his post as long as possible and swim to shore when the tower finally fell. On Friday, April 11th, Bennett left the station to visit Boston to procure a replacement for the boat lost in the previous storm. He was due to return the next day, but a new storm rolled in, making his return impossible. That left the two assistants alone in the tower. Throughout the weekend, conditions only continued to get worse as a major gale rolled over the region. The storm surge was tremendous, one of the worst Boston had ever endured. Flooding was so severe that boats had to be used to traverse the city's waterfront streets. By Tuesday, the storm intensified. Flooding forced Bennett and his family to flee their home in Cohasset. Despite the ordeal, Bennett's attention was fixed on Minots Ledge and the men inside. The storm made it almost impossible to see the station from shore, but its light occasionally pierced through the clouds. Some who spotted it that afternoon claimed that the tower had a noticeable tilt to one side. The light was last seen by the residents of Scituate at around 10 p.m. on Wednesday night. Despite raging for days, the storm finally unleashed its full fury late on the night of April 16th into the early morning hours of the 17th. At around 1 a.m. in Scituate, residents heard the unmistakable clanging of the Minots Ledge fog bell. Under normal circumstances, it was rung at regular intervals to warn ships shrouded in fog. Now it rang out with a frantic clanging, as if someone was desperately signaling for help. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the ringing fell silent. The town was left to wait out the night as the storm raged overhead. By morning, conditions began to calm. As the day wore on, the lighthouse remained shrouded in clouds. Then a Gloucester fisherman spotted a bottle floating in the waves. Inside was a scrap of paper. It read, "The lighthouse won't stand over tonight. She shakes 2 feet each way now. JW and JA." Throughout the morning, Bennett and other locals collected debris that washed ashore. Pieces of lantern equipment, broken furniture, bedding. Bennett even recognized several pieces of his own clothing. He also found a rubber life jacket. It appeared to have been fastened, but was ripped away from whoever wore it. Soon a second life jacket in a similar state was found. When the weather finally cleared, everyone's fears were confirmed. Where the tower once stood, now only a handful of twisted and broken metal piles poked out of the waves. It's believed that the central support broke first. For a short period, the tower remained standing, held up by the outer supports, but they eventually broke, sending the cage-like keeper's quarters and lantern room tumbling into the raging sea. It seems that the two men indeed used Bennett's escape rope to evacuate the tower, but the violent storm made survival impossible. Joseph Antoni's body was found washed ashore on Nantasket Beach. Joseph Wilson was eventually found on Gull Island, about a mile southwest of Minots Ledge, not far from Scituate. He had suffered a skull fracture, but his position indicated that he had reached the island alive, but died of exposure sometime in the night. Just as he had promised, he had made it to shore. The tragedy at Minots Ledge rocked the local community. Some, like John Bennett, believed that the tower's instability was caused by a split in the rocks. Captain Swift blamed the storage platform and the escape rope that keepers had installed after the building was completed. Others felt that Captain Swift's design was wholly inadequate for the punishing storms that frequented the area and eventually doomed the tower. But no one ever faced any consequences. The community moved on, and Captain Swift went on to enjoy a long and successful career. The destruction of the Iron Tower left Minots Ledge unmarked, and a small lightship that had been stationed at the Brandywine Shoal in Delaware since 1823 was moved to the area. It was soon replaced by a larger lightship built in Somerset, Massachusetts for $27,000, which was anchored on Minots Ledge from 1854 to 1860. But this was still just a temporary fix. Plans were already beginning to take shape for a more permanent solution to mark the deadly shoals. In August 1852, Congress appropriated the first $80,000 for the new lighthouse. It would be designed by General Joseph G. Totten, Chief Engineer of the U.S. Army and a member of the United States Lighthouse Board. The new Minots Ledge would be the first major project of the newly formed organization, which replaced the poorly managed United States Lighthouse establishment in 1852. Upon completion, the project would cost $330,000, one of the most expensive lighthouses in the history of the United States. Construction began on June 20th, 1855. This time, they weren't taking any chances. A stone tower with a solid base of interlocking granite stones was selected for the project. The massive stones were carefully cut and assembled at Government Island before they were carried to the site by ship and assembled. They were quarried by the Granite Railway Company in Quincy, Massachusetts. The new tower would be built almost directly on top of the remains of the old one. Work was slow and tedious. Crews could only work for a few hours during low tide, when the sea was calm. 5 years after the work began, the final stone was placed on June 29, 1860. Made up of 1,079 solid granite blocks, the tower stands 102 feet 9 inches tall from its base to the tip of its copper dome, with a focal height of 85 feet. Its second-order Fresnel lens was officially lit on November 15, 1860. For over 150 years, the tower has withstood the worst that Mother Nature could throw at it. In 1892, a rotating mechanism was installed on the Fresnel lens, making its powerful beam into a flashing light. It didn't take long before people realized that its distinct signature, 143, could stand for I love you, and the tower was quickly dubbed the I love you light, or lover's light. In 1947, the light was automated, and in 1964, its second-order Fresnel lens was replaced by a third-order lens. The lighthouse still stands today, its distinctive signature a local fixture. Most who look out on the tower have no idea that anything stood before. The countless lives lost, and the hubristic attempts to tame nature's fury are nothing but a distant memory. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. Check them out using the link below. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.